people across the globe. You have been waging peace. You've dedicated your life to doing this. And I'm hoping you can tell us about how you started your journey. What has your life been like? Why have you dedicated yourself to this? And tell us about the process of founding your organization, Eve.
Let's hope Rita can unmute herself.
Unmute yourself. Okay.
Thank you. Now I'm able to unmute myself. I think it's very restricted. First of all, I really want to thank Caroline, Dr. Caroline, Dr. Ofong. I hope you guys can hear me. I am very privileged to really be invited to this important and great conversation that you guys, ladies from Southern Cameroon, have come together to push for permanent peace and justice in your country. To answer your question, I would like to start by saying that most of you might have known South Sudan. It is a country that has been through conflict for a very, very long time. Almost everybody now alive in South Sudan was born during the conflict, because it started way back in 1955, fighting colonialism, fighting the Arab colonialists. Then we got our independence in 2011, and then we had power struggle within South Sudan itself. I think what motivated me for peace is really the history that the country has lived through. I was born during the conflict. I don't understand why bombs will fall in my city, will kill people. But then as I grew up, I realized that something was not right in my country. There is a reason why schools were closed. There was a reason why people are being displaced. And there was a reason why people are being killed in the country. And I started asking myself, why is this happening to us? Then as I grew up, I understood that Southern Sudanese were fighting discrimination. Southern Sudanese were fighting recognition. They want to be recognized. Southern Sudanese were fighting because they are seen as second-class citizens because of our skin color, because we are dark, because the wider Sudan is seen as an Arab country. Southern Sudanese were fighting because they are Christians and they do not have all the rights as the others. And there were so many reasons why South Sudanese were fighting. But then I realized, having grown up in Sudan, I felt the discrimination myself. When I graduated from school, I didn't get the opportunity to get a job because of the fact that I am from the southern part of the country. There were absolutely no jobs for Southerners because we are seen as not like full Sudanese, and you cannot get jobs with the government. And in the NGO world, as a young graduate, you have to have 3, 4, 5 years of experience before you can get any job with the NGO. So myself and some of my friends decided to come together and say, we are privileged to have finished our education. So why don't we use our education to help South Sudan? And that is when activism started in me. We saw that South Sudanese women went through a lot through the conflict, and we started talking about going back home and building the country. And my organization, Eve for Women Development, has worked during the Sudan's election and the South Sudan referendum. We mobilized a lot of women to vote, and that resulted to our independence. I want to say one important thing. I was listening to BBC yesterday, and there was a discussion about secessions in Africa. And South Sudan was given as a negative example, that we got our independence, and then 2 years later, we went into conflict. But my response to that was, because there was also discussion about Ambazonia and the Biafra and other regions in Africa that wanted to secede. But then the point I want to make clear is that South Sudan got its independence because people felt there was a strong cause that would need independence. And that's why we all stood as a people that we need to be we need to have our dignity, we need to have our rights, we need to enjoy our resources, and we need to have an independent country as ourselves. And that pushed every South Sudanese to vote. And I don't think South Sudanese regret voting for independence. Yes, we are in conflict, but with time, we believe as putting ourselves together, we will build peace and South Sudan will emerge as a strong country, just to start with. But what I really want to share today with the women of Southern Cameroon is that we are standing in solidarity with you. We know, and I have seen from the video, it is the same thing as South Sudanese that we have gone through. But I just want to share with you a few points as you stand and you push for peace in your country. First of all, our experience with the South Sudan peace process. We have to come together as women, just like what you are doing right now. And we started calling for refrain, calling for people, the warring parties to stop killing the civilians, to stop displacing women and go to the table to discuss issues and not to be killing. But it was not an easy process. As we all know, peace is a long-term process and it takes time. So we had to do a lot of advocacy, a lot of advocacy. When I talk about advocacy, I mean, when the conflict was going on, we were advocating. Even when the peace process was happening, we still continue advocating, because advocacy, when you are pushing for peace, as you say, then advocacy would be your number one thing that you will always have to re-strategize, come up, go back to the drawing board and discuss, do analysis, and continue pushing with advocacy. We formed the South Sudan Women's Coalition because we realized that if we are just scattered and doing things in our own ways, we will not have an impact. And that's why the South Sudan Women's Coalition was formed. And the role of the coalition, or how the coalition influenced the South Sudan peace process, is that we are able to come together as women and we push for the agenda. And I like what Dr. Osong have really put forward. How do we stop the war, and how do we stop the war right now? For us, it is the same question that we ask ourselves. But then we say, if we have to stop the war, we need to have a clear strategy of what we really want to do. And so we had been preparing in advance, you know, writing a lot of concept notes, making people understand what the real problem in South Sudan is. And we are constantly meeting people. We have met the African Union, we met the UN in New York, and the different diplomatic missions in New York. And in the case of South Sudan, the Troika, which is Norway, UK, and the US. These were the people that we continuously speak to put pressure on the parties to come to the table. But then one important thing, and which is something that I have seen clearly in this group, is being conceptually clear on the issues on the table. You have to know what you are calling for. You have to know the background of what is happening in the country. And you have to keep yourself updated on what is happening, such that when you speak to people, you are speaking from the point of knowing exactly what is happening in the country. And also sharing information and giving feedback from the meetings that you do, or like meetings like this, give feedback to people to know. One thing we also did is we had a core group, which we call the technical group, that continuously analyze the situation and prepare policy documents and share with the people. But then persistence and visibility, to be known that you are the group that are calling for peace in the country and the war should stop. So these are some of the techniques that we have been using. But then there are a number of challenges that you will also face when you are pushing for peace. You know, because as women, we are always perceived as not vital because we do not carry gun. They see that we have less power to prove ourselves. And, you know, they will tell you the women talk a lot. And then when there is an active conflict, it is always a male-dominated arena. It's a harsh environment, and the voices of women are very few people really listen to the voices of women. But then that doesn't mean that we should not continue pushing. And we have to know that with peace processes, when it starts, it is a fast pace, and sometimes women have to really prepare in advance if this is what you are calling for. But from our case, I would like to share a few lessons learned that probably might make sense to some of you. Is that when we started pushing, we realized that numbers matter, because they will always try to isolate women who are active and keep you far from each other. But in any process that you are advocating for to stop the war, you have to know that numbers matter. If one of you is consulted, you should open up the space for others. Like what you are doing now, I will really say that you need to expand more and get more women from the different walks of life. And at the grassroots level, I know there might be challenges, but there are always ways that you can get the voices of women. And as I said earlier on, understanding timing of various events for effective preparation and for advocacy. Women also have to be very proactive and be responsive to issues as they raise. Like right now, this discussion is about bringing you together and see what you can do to stop the war, and also influencing as a continuous process at various levels. I know you are all over the world, but you need to know where power lies and how you can strategically pass your messages to those who can influence the warring party. Because what is very important is at this moment in your case is that there should be a process going on, and most importantly, there should be ceasefire for the killing to stop, for the displacement to stop, and to protect the vulnerable people. And one important thing, make your case known. Like right now, I have started engaging with Cameroon recently, but previously I have a little knowledge about Cameroon. So sharing information is very important. You just never know who has a connection to who that can say a word and add pressure somewhere. So it is important that you share information and you widen the network, you continuously build alliance, and send consistent messages to those, to the parties, and also to those you think have power to push those behind this conflict. So I want to really end by saying a few things, that the situation in your country is not unique. It is something that we have been through, and it requires a strategic advocacy. So you need to be able to also know which cards to throw or which cards to display, and which cards, as women, you need to hold closely to your chest. For me, what I would say right now is for the women of Cameroon really to start calling for ceasefire, to stop the killing, and calling for the parties to come back to the table. I mean, an example that I will give is that, you know, when people kill women, they kill children, they rape people, they burn houses from both sides. The minute you talk to them about justice, it's like you are just scaring them off. When you talk to them about, you know, accountability, it just scares them off. So if we really want these parties to come to the table, then we need to use the right words for them to be able to come to the table. And that is what I meant by holding your cards close to your heart. Once you get these guys on the table, then you'll start talking about justice. Then you'll start talking about accountability. But if they're not at the table, you can shout for justice, you can shout for accountability, but they will never come to the table. So you know your context, and you know what you need to do to get these people to stop the killing, to ceasefire, to come to the table. Then you start displaying your other cards. And I want to say that the pursuit for peace is a very long process, and it is a very lonely path as well as women standing for peace. Because as the journey goes, you realize that there are others that will fall off, there will be challenges, and those who commit, sometimes you'll find yourself by yourself alone. So what will motivate you? How do you keep yourself motivating to keep on pushing for peace? So, finally, I want to say, when you come around the table and when the peace process starts, just know that it is not one side that is going to win. It has to be a win-win solution. This is also something that women need to know, and you start pushing. As I said, keep your cards close to your chest, know what to display to get people to listen. And because when you talk of ceasefire, when you talk of stop killing the people, when you start talking of let's come to the table, it is softer than saying we need justice now. Anybody with blood in their hands, when you talk about justice, it is just a no-no to them. So I think these are the few things that I will share with you. And I hope to continuously keep monitoring and talking with colleagues in Cameroon, and hope we will be sharing more with you. Thank you very much for inviting me to talk to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Rita. If we could please unmute and give you a round of applause. You are an incredible human and so inspiring. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, so I also have the pleasure of introducing our second speaker today, Shadia Marhaban from Indonesia. She is a mediator. She has worked extensively in her region and beyond. Ms. Marhaban has also participated in the Helsinki Peace Agreement in 2005 between the government of Indonesia and GAM that ended the 30 years of conflict there. Since then, she has concentrated her work on consulting for peace dialogues in many regions that have conflict in Southeast Asia, and she's established contacts with several conflict actors in the region. She studied political science and international relations in Indonesia and is a fellow at the Weatherhead Center for International Affairs at Harvard University. So welcome. I'll start with a question about your process, about your experience in the negotiation process. Can you tell us about your understanding of shuttle diplomacy, what that is before the talks, and how did that happen, and what can you share with us about your experience as being part of that negotiation?
First of all, thank you very much for inviting me to this very important discussion. I think my experience is not much different than many other women who are being part of a negotiation, and it was an excellent explanation from Leo just now about her own experience and what strategies is to be used. I think in my case, it's not very much different also. And the way we see this is that women are not only being there because women have to be there, but we are already there. So let's think that way. So if we think that way, we can find a strategy for us to take part in negotiation. In our case, we have 3 kinds of negotiation. 2 of them failed. And so we use that opportunity. So women use that opportunity as a political bridging, to the next level. And I think internationalizing the issues is one of the important element as well in every struggle, because if it's only known to your own people, it is very hard to work at the international level. So this is what we do. We establish a lot of like so-called consulate in nearly almost like 50 countries. And the reason why we establish consulate is that for other people to know and to understand. But imagine those times, this was back in 1999, when things are a little bit different globally, and the world is different today, the world and how people see the world also different. So 1999, it was a time where democracy is on the launch and everyone is talking about, opening up, supporting democracy and also building collaborative, participative democracy among the people. So the sentiment, the global sentiment, what happened inside you, it's also whatever happened outside, globally, it will impact what you are fighting for internally. So we use that opportunity, and opening consulate for our own movement is to build a network with many different countries. So we have sort of like ambassador, like, people, be it from the civil society, be it from the armed groups. And that personnel or that individual must work together with different organizations in that respective countries. So sometimes we will be seen as, not good, but in some countries we're seen as good, so it's depend on what, how that country have that, specific relation. In my time, I was, living in Europe and also in the United States. So I used that opportunity to campaign on the human rights and many different aspects. So, so women can play that role too. Doesn't necessarily have to be sitting on the table. Yes, that is a particular privilege opportunity, but I think there are thousands of others opportunity that we can see. And I think focusing too much on gender also, that's not something that we are pushing on. We're doing more than just being that, or seeing as women working only on gender issues, but we expand our knowledge. We learn about different things. We learn about ceasefire. We learn about amnesty, given amnesty. We learn about security issues. So our knowledge is not just stopped on gender, because I realized that even today, many years after my own negotiation, I felt that if we talk about that issues, many people say like, we know what you're talking about, but we want more of the Shadia, So I think we have to be more strategically open to learning new things, and also applying it, and really walk the talk of what we want to achieve. And the third thing I think is also to help other women. See, sometimes we forget about these things. Sometimes we see that we only see the top layers, but also supporting other women is an opportunity for us to grow, and it's also to give us opportunity to share knowledge to other women. I've seen it that way, and the reason I changed to become mediators is when I see that peace process is not just about sitting on the table. The peace process is about implementation. And I switched the journey, from myself being a negotiator to become a mediator. And it's a journey that I've found to find myself. I realized that being a woman, being sitting on the table is not enough. Implementation requires a lot of work. Implementation requires a lot of commitment. And that's actually the challenge that we are facing in the world currently. There are dozens of peace process, but implementations are very poor. How can we improve that? So I think these women also can play a role. And also, what is the movement? What is your movement aim? You ask yourself that question again. Is it peace is your destination, or is it something else? So if you have a bigger agenda, then peace will be there to help you to build your path to your next level. And the reason I'm saying that is because most of us, we stop at peace, so we tend not to focus on the implementation. And when I started to become a mediator, I'm more focusing on the implementation because I realized that this will keep the peace process sustained. It is not the peace. The signing of the peace agreement is actually, you know, a starting point of a real peace. So what you want is actually, how can the implementation be acceptable by both parties, and that we can run the peace agreement? Because we have to talk to the people, we have to talk to the community leaders, we have to you know, administered, orchestrated the whole thing. So implementation to me is the key. And a part of the implementation is also, how do we engage after? So post-peace process is important. Post-peace process is also a way for us women to learn more from different peace process around the world. So by having an opportunity for you to travel, because you know, usually during the war you can't go, you can travel. So use that opportunity for you to learn from different groups, from different movements, from different countries, and that you can enhance your knowledge and learn how can you improve your own situation to get a better implementation. And the reason I'm talking a lot about implementation is because it is really the problem. You know, it is how it is being implemented. It is the commitment is being made. How government, especially if you are part of a movement and they want to make your influence, you know, lesser to some extent, but how can you still be in the situation where you can still be influenced as leaders? So leaders is also important, and women are good leaders, and we know that women can lead, and if we can expand, if we can enhance this with more knowledge, I'm sure we can be you know, implementing the peace process as we want. So I hope that answers some of your questions about involving women in peace process. Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Shadia. Thank you. If we can unmute, give Shadia a round of applause, and remember to mute again. And it is my pleasure to now pass the baton back to Dr. Osong and a woman who will be speaking.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you to our two speakers who have just preceded us. I'd like to remind the audience that it is about the voiceless and the faceless women that we stand here. So our women from ground zero, we call it ground zero, the epicenter of the world, is going to be coming up next. For safety and security reasons, we'll only hear her by audio. So if our tech team can play the short audio for our audience, we will be right on track. So stand by, ladies and gentlemen. And our next speaker up will be announced after this video.
Okay, Daddy, thank you. I just salute all my way the list where we listening for this video. 2018, my Pekin just woke up, open door, say me come outside for good peace. We will still the inside house. 1 year, we are gone.
Mr. Nanchak, I think this is the wrong one, please.
No, this is correct. This is correct. Is the woman from ground zero, or is there another audio?
I thought you wanted the one of the combat fighter from ground zero.
No, that's later. This is
Okay.
a
Go ahead, please.
direct victim of the war. So,
go ahead.
Thank you.
Thank you.
18, my Pekin just woke up, open door, say me come outside for good peace. We will still the inside house. 1 year, we are gone. Nobody cry. Say they shoot Pekin when they do it for house. We run come out for check and say nobody cry wait to one come out when I'm on Pekin way. Military don't can sleep for plenty them for night. They want come out for outside for good peace for morning time. They shoot it for a hit. They shoot it for a hit now. We come on now. All man picking them all. They don't hear gun or they don't run. Now woman them, where they be the tie hat, so woman then said they be run. The one the way they be the tie hat, they come. We not them. I be there already collapse myself. My picking collapse. The other men then they run. Now some other neighbor, they went a woman then, they didn't take wrapper then tie and for cash blood for a head, for cash that blood for a head. It passed them. They take and put her inside chalk, push and go down for health center. Health center people, they don't run them all. They sleep for day. The only bleed. The one before for evening. Someone then talk say we no fit keep am so me die. They put them again inside chalk, push and bring them for general hospital. Then they sleep. They don't even see a person we go in charge for after 2 days. They move the bullet now. Then from then, if it, even if they talk, if he paralyzed, they put 13 bags of blood for his skin. Now, he on a diet, he on physiotherapy, he on life medication, and he passed away for gate time right now since the crisis they only continue to go. And plenty of women them, they don't suffer this thing. Now if you go for villages now woman then they work out, now the woman then they for villages you will see the one where they don't kill a man, kill even Peking. You see some other one the way they don't burn their houses there, they live now under trees. You see some other one them now they go fix bridge where they even pass go farm for go find some small thing. Some other one them you want to see them now them they dig grave for bury boys and the way they don't already kill them. So this crisis really affect now we women the most and picking them. So,
Thank you for that, Mr. Nantrop. So to our audience who cannot understand what we call pidgin English, this is a woman at the epicenter of the war, relating the crisis that has led to a child being shot by the military and now is paralyzed and in need of life-sustaining medication. She's one of the few lucky ones to have a son survive the war. So it was important that on a platform such as this, that we hear directly from those women whose voices cannot be heard due to the security concerns. And so we're going to go to our next speaker, Beth Lyons. She has been a criminal defense attorney for more than 30 years, practicing exclusively in legal aid programs in New York City since 2004, in the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda and the International Criminal Court at The Hague. For the last 23 years, Ms. Lyons has served as an alternate representative to the United Nations in New York for the International Association of Democratic Lawyers. She has also volunteered with the South African Truth Commission and has published articles in the International Criminal Law and on Truth Commission. So please, audience, welcome Beth Lyons to share her experiences with us and how we understand crimes of atrocity and crimes against humanity, from questions of what legal mechanisms of accountability for human rights violation and the role of the international and regional judicial mechanism. So Beth, it's my pleasure to hear from you, and the audience awaits your comments this afternoon. Thank you. If you can unmute yourself, Beth.
Okay, I unmuted. All right, is that?
Thank you. Good to see you. Thank you.
Good to see you. Thank you, Dr. Osung, for your warm welcome. And I want to say it's a privilege to have been asked to participate in this program. And I want to congratulate all of you who have worked on the organizing of this program. I mean, it's excellent, and I'm getting energized and informed by it, and especially by our last two speakers. I should say for a start, I noticed on the last program, Dr. Osung, there were 3 questions you'd wanted me to address. And of course, I didn't print them and I don't remember them.
I can refresh your memory. And just so I know, I don't wish to rush our participants. We really want to hear from them as I say we build this bridge. But the first one was, what are the accountability for human rights violation? Is there a role for the international and regional judicial mechanisms?
Right.
And if you have time, within the constrained time we're allowing you, what about crimes against women and young girls? And what can you advise us from the standpoint of crimes against humanity? So if you could answer those would be helpful.
Let me try to do that. And please feel free to interrupt me close to the end because I'm a lawyer by trade. We talk. So I don't want to hog time. I want so the other speakers can talk. First of all, let me say from the outset, because of my work on the Rwanda cases and also my ICC case, I've traveled throughout many countries on the continent, but unfortunately have never been to Cameroon. I do work with Chief Charles Taku on my cases, who's known to perhaps many in your audience, who is from Cameroon. And so I know a little bit about what's been going on through him. And I would also say that my remarks, there's a caveat, which is that I know that there are lawyers and others who've been very active in the struggle in Cameroon for decades. And at the end of the day, they are the ones who need to advise what kinds of options make sense, what doesn't make sense. I really have no idea because I have no practice. I would like to say generally that a lot of times a crime happens, something happens in the course of a war, and one of the first questions is, where do I get a remedy? Where do I get redress? How can we hold the president, the military, the chief of police accountable? And this is an issue again in the struggle for self-determination in Ambazonia. And it's important to look at this and understand that the judicial processes in some cases may work, may make some sense, but that they are driven by the struggles on the ground. And once the crimes have been identified, once you have decided what it is you want, then you can go to the step of saying, okay, where do we bring a case? Does it make sense? Bringing cases in any court is a long, arduous process. And particularly victims who bring cases are discouraged all the time. I work as a defense attorney. So very often I'm on the other side. I'm defending individuals in the case of ICTR in Rwanda and also in the ICC, most recently in the ongoing case dealing with Lord's Resistance Army in Uganda, of individuals who are accused of crimes. But I recognize that the victims in all of these cases often come from the same communities as those who are charged with perpetrating the crimes. One thing I want to say quickly about the ICC, the International Criminal Court in The Hague, one of the good things about the ICC is its role it has assigned to victims. It gives a voice to victims. This didn't just happen, it was a result of struggle through lots of committees and lots of preparatory committees and lots of other gatherings and organized fora before the Rome Statute was entered into force in 1998. But it gives a voice to victims. Now, victims have a role in the pre-trial part, during the trial, and if someone is convicted in the reparations section. Now, the problem with the ICC, as I'm sure a lot of people know, is, in my view, is that it metes out selective justice. You know, I supported, my organization, my colleagues have supported the need for an ICC, but we believe that rule of law applies to everyone. everyone, both sides in a conflict. This is not the case, for example, in the Uganda situation, where only one side is being tried, and the crimes of the government of Uganda during its continuing civil war is not on trial. So this is an important thing. For there to be legitimacy at the International Criminal Court, you have to have, I think, investigation and prosecution of both sides of a conflict, and you also have to have fair trial. You have to, fair trial and due process are important pieces of it. Now, this discussion is probably for another time, but I just want to lay this out. And the third thing I want to say about the International Criminal Court is that selective prosecution, as everyone here probably knows, has focused almost exclusively on Africa. I don't need to say more about this, but you know, the International Criminal Court has been described by some as, quote, an African court for that reason. And while it should be noted that African states parties played a leading role in bringing the court into being, at the same time, the prosecution has turned around and basically only targeted and brought into the dock persons from African countries. And that's just basically the reality. It may be investigating other places. There's Bolivia, there's Colombia, there's Palestine, et cetera, but the focus has been unequally, and in my view, discriminatory in its focus on Africa only. It certainly hasn't investigated crimes of my own country, although my own country has not signed the Rome Statute. They unsigned it. Now, Cameroon has signed the statute in 1998. It's called the Rome Statute, but they did not ratify it. So Cameroon isn't a state party. And this presents difficulties in the court having jurisdictions over the atrocities that we see in the videos, that we know about, that people talk about, that people are still experiencing right now. And there are a number of details related to this, which I'm not going to go into, but but Cameroon, it's doubtful, even though it hasn't signed the Rome Statute, whether it would agree to jurisdiction of the court. This means that the ICC has lots of problems if you want to see that as an option right now. Now, these at the end of the day need to be worked out by Cameroonian lawyers who are well aware of these and have written about it and have dealt with these issues. I just want to highlight this. At the same time, though, there are crimes going on, for example, the deportations of the forced deportations as a result of the war from Cameroon into Nigeria. Nigeria is a state party, and Nigeria chose can exercise its role as a state party and refer the situation of the Cameroonian refugees to the prosecutor for investigation. So this is certainly a possibility. There are a number of these kinds of possibilities. Nothing is insurmountable, but what you choose to do, what makes sense to do, really has to be determined in the context of the struggle. The second issue I want to talk, judicial venue I want to talk about is the African Court of Justice, the African Court for Justice and Human Rights. Now, I did a lot of research because I was ignorant. I hadn't read the African Charter for a while. I was ignorant of all of the protocols, et cetera, et cetera. I've gone through these, but the bottom line is that there is a mandate to protect and promote human rights. It appears to me that the African Court works hand in hand with the African Union Commission, which has its own rules and regulations. And so far, individuals or organizations that have observer status to the AU can bring cases before the court. So there are avenues that that exist regionally. And as I said, I'm not the best person to talk about it, but I think that I just want to make people aware of these. I also want to bring to everyone's attention the protocol on women, because I was looking in my research through the documents that were sent by Dr. Osong, as well as other documents I found. And Cameroon ratified the protocol to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights on the Rights of Women in Africa in 2012. Now, this protocol was adopted in 2003 and was ratified was ratified in 2005. What was significant to me about the document, in addition to all of the issues about women and equality that it talks about, is that there's a section in it about right to peace in Article 10 and the protection of women in armed conflicts, Article 11. Now, this is a document that has to be implemented and enforced, and it becomes part of the arsenal of documents which may be part of a future legal case, but I think that it's important. The last thing I want to say is I want to talk a little bit about the issue of Rwanda and the genocide. I know that's not the main topic here today, but I just want to say that one of the problems with the court, the ad hoc court in Arusha, the International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda, to investigate and to prosecute cases of genocide, was its selective prosecution only of Hutus. 93 people were indicted for crimes, including genocide in Rwanda. They were all Hutus. No one who was a Tutsi was ever prosecuted. No member of the RPF was ever prosecuted. The Rwandan Patriotic Front, led by Paul Kagame, who was trained, among other places, at Fort Leavenworth in the US. And it creates a situation of clear, out and out selective prosecution. So when we talk about Rwandan genocide, I understand how it's being used in a general sense by people, you know, when people talk about it, when people try to describe situations. But as I'm saying, as lawyers, when we look at what it means, and we look at the fact that there wasn't prosecution of both sides, which had been mandated by the UN resolution setting up the ICTR. So I think that that's just something to be aware of. The woman who opposed Kagame in elections, I think probably 2 times ago, Victoire Ingabire Umuhoza, who was imprisoned for, among other things, saying that there were 2 genocides against Hutus and Tutsis. So the point is that the term has to be inclusive. I don't know the situation on the ground, and the judicial mechanism has to be set up so that the rule of law applies to everyone. I don't have a position on the term and using it in the Cameroonian context because I just don't have the information now. But I felt I wanted to raise that because I spent so many years in Arusha defending people. In closing, I want to say that it's important to recognize that there are places to bring complaints today for violations of human rights through the processes of the AU and the African Court of Justice for Human Rights. This is important. And I think that whether or not you do it, that's a question for people to decide in terms of, does it fit into the strategy? Does it make sense? I think there are some problems in terms of the ICC. And I also want to say that I think that using the UN structures, I think one of the previous speakers talked about this a little bit, is important. I noticed that many organizations in Cameroon have used the Human Rights Council structure and its reporting mechanisms for violations of treaties which Cameroon has signed, for example, the Treaty Against Torture. And there are documents that these organizations have presented, so that all of these avenues have been used and are being used, have been written about and discussed by Cameroonian lawyers. And I think the issue is figuring out where do they fit in, and can the judicial mechanisms serve the struggle for accountability and justice for the Ambazonian people, for self-determination, because to me, that's the fundamental question here. Oh no.
Dr. Caroline, are you there?
I am here, and thank you so much for that, Beth. Everyone, can we unmute and give her a round of applause? And now I will introduce our next speaker, Tanja Najimajir, who has a remarkable background. She was born in the Netherlands, where she studied Romance languages and cultures. And in 2000, the year 2000, during her university practices in Colombia, she got to know the Colombian reality, the armed conflict, and the existence of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC-EP. In 2003, she joined the guerrilla forces, where she performed various activities that included teaching English, Marxist philosophy, and other topics to combatants. She also developed all of the daily activities in the jungle for FARC. And in 2012, she actually joined the negotiations between the government and guerrilla in Cuba for 5 years. And after signing the peace agreement, she lived in a transition area for the decommissioning of weapons and reincorporation of ex-fighters in the west of Colombia. And right now, she's doing a master's degree in interculturality, development, and territorial peace, and a specialization in investigation methods. And she lives in the city of Cali. So welcome, Tanja. And if you can please tell us about being airlifted out of the jungle in Colombia and flown to Havana, Cuba in 2012. Talk to us about your experiences as a female combatant and also as a participant in the peace negotiation process.
Okay, thank you very much, Caroline, for this introduction. I'm very pleased to be here. I feel very honored to be here with all of you and to be able to speak about my experience as a fighter and also about my experience as a negotiator. And I would like to say, first of all, before I start to explain a little bit about myself, that I'm just going to speak about our experience here in Colombia, you know, and I think we should be very careful with imposing things or saying you have to do this, you have to do that, you know. I'm just going to tell about our experience. You just take up whatever you want to use, and you just throw away whatever you can't use, you know, because there are a lot of cultural differences between countries. I'm aware of that. I didn't know anything about Cameroon. I didn't know anything about the war that was going on. And I'm almost sure that a lot of you don't know anything about Colombia. So I'm going to start with a small introduction on Colombia. Colombia is in Latin America. People speak Spanish. And there was a long conflict going on in Colombia. It started in 1964 when guerrilla fighters started to took up arms, weapons against the government. There was a land problem in Colombia, and there was also a problem of political exclusion in the country, like elites who have the power and who don't want peasants on the countryside and other people to participate in politics. So those were mainly the reasons why people took up weapons in Colombia. We are mostly a peasants' army. Then there were some peace negotiations which all failed. And then in 2012, the last peace negotiations started. They lasted for 4 years. and they finished in 2016, and they were successful. Successful between parentheses, because I thought it was very interesting what Shadia said about implementation. A peace agreement is just a paper, you know? It's just a paper signed by two parties, and if there's no proper implementation, there's nothing. You don't have anything, you know? And that's something that's happening here, and I'm going to talk about that later. So I came to Colombia for the first time in 2000. I joined the FARC-EP, the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, in 2003. That's when I went to the jungle. I lived in the jungle for almost 10 years. And then I was taken out of the jungle to Havana, Cuba, where the peace negotiations started in 2012, as I've already said. When the peace negotiations started, the first point of the agenda was rural reform. And I was the only woman sitting at the negotiation table for the guerrilla forces. There was also a woman on the other side of the table for the government forces. I was in charge at the table of writing the agreement, getting track of the discussions, and also preparing the discussions at the table. We were 10 negotiators, and there were 20 in total for the guerrilla and for the government, and there were only 2 women. So I think that's an important thing to note, you know. I think it's always suspicious when there's only 1 woman at the table, because I think that woman is at the table really because of being a woman, you know. I'm getting back to that later on as well. First of all, I wanted to tell you something about the agenda in Havana. The agenda had 6 points. It was not only about decommissioning of weapons or about a ceasefire or anything. It was about land reforms. It was about political participation. It was about the drug problem in Colombia. In Colombia, we have a huge drug problem. It was also about the consequences of the conflict. There was a point called victims, which included a peace tribunal, a truth commission, which is working right now. And there was also a 6th point of the agenda, which was implementation and verification of the peace agreements. And also the 3rd point was end of conflict, which included like the decommissioning of weapons and also the combating the paramilitary structures that was still going on after the conflict. 2 years after we started peace negotiations in Havana, women organizations from Colombia started to put pressure on us, on the guerrillas and on the government as well, because they wanted more women at the table in Havana, and they wanted to include a gender perspective in the peace agreement. There wasn't a gender perspective by then. There wasn't anything about women in the peace agreement, and they started to push and to push and to push until a gender subcommission was created in 2014. I was part of the gender subcommission, and we had the small task of reviewing all the agreements that were made by then and including a gender perspective into those agreements. That was a very interesting task. We also had a lot of meetings with women organizations from Colombia, with female combatants from all over the world to ask them what their experience was in terms of reintegration. As female ex-combatants, we needed to have a lot of input on how our lives would be after handing over our weapons and everything. So we had a lot of interesting experiences in Havana. I think we managed to make a lot of contacts with women, Colombian women, also Latin American women. We started to work on feminism from the inside of the guerrilla forces. We had never worked on that. We didn't know really anything about it. I have to admit that. And we started to work on it. We started to invite feminists from all over the world, like, what can you teach us? What can you tell us? You know, we need to know, we need to start working on this. There were also Kurdish combatants who went to Havana, and they explained us about their struggle. It was all very interesting. And so 2 years later, in 2016, the peace agreement was signed. As I've already said, the implementation is not going very well. And I think that's something very important to keep in mind. I would just repeat, you know, a peace agreement is a paper. And we should like be really aware when you're speaking, when you're writing that peace agreement, are we capable of implementing everything we're discussing, you know? I think there's a huge peace agreement in Colombia. It's a very good peace agreement with a gender perspective. It includes everything, causes of the conflict, the consequences of the conflict. But right now, the only thing about the implementation, and I'm generalizing a little bit, but almost the only thing that has worked was the decommissioning of weapons. And that's really sad, you know? Ex-combatants really have returned to society, to that same corrupt, unequal society. They took the weapons, you know? We took weapons, we took up weapons because we wanted to change society, and we thought society was going to change through the peace agreement, and it really didn't happen. So that's something I think is very important to keep in mind. Also, I wanted to say something about women as peacemakers. I don't know, I think a lot of you wouldn't agree with me, but I'm just going to give like my opinion on this. Are women peacemakers, you know? In the end, for me, the image of women being peacemakers is also the image created by patriarchy. And it's patriarchy we were fighting against. We were anti-capitalist, anti-patriarchy. And I think that image of a caring, of a lovely, of an understanding, the weak sex, we're the communicating sex, you know? I think that's also a consequence, a result of patriarchy. And that's what we want to eradicate as combatants, you know? So in my opinion, why should women participate in peace processes? And why do we have the right to participate? Because we are just as capable as men to participate. And we are 50% of the world population. We are 51% here in Colombia. So that should be enough reason for us to be sitting at that table and to start participating at a peace agreement. That's why I say we shouldn't be satisfied with just one seat at the table. I feel very disappointed of myself when I remember that I was sitting at that table as the only woman, and I wasn't capable of saying we need more women at this table, you know? That's a big mistake I made by then, because I didn't have the consciousness of saying we should be a 50% woman at this table, you know? And I think that's also a lesson that should be learned. We should have a lot of solidarity with other women, and not be satisfied with just one seat. I mean, it's not enough. We're 50%, you know? So I think that's an important thing to keep in mind. One seat is suspicious. So The other thing I wanted to say is that finally a peace agreement is a unique opportunity for women and also for society to roll back the historical discrimination that has taken place against women. And you can only do that having women at the table. Men can't do that because they haven't felt that discrimination, you know, and we shouldn't just think about a peace agreement as, a peace agreement is not about silencing weapons. That will not bring peace. Maybe it will bring some peace, yeah? It will bring what some people call a negative peace, but we want a positive peace. We want modifications in the structures of power. We want discrimination against women to be rolled back. That's what we want with a peace agreement. So we should, like, as women, seize the opportunity to be at the peace negotiations, to make a peace agreement that's really going to accomplish that, and that is going to better the situation of women in your countries. So my final message would be speak up. Speak up also when you feel, or when you're silenced, when you feel that men don't like the way you're speaking up, when you feel that it doesn't make sense what you're saying, just speak up. You are there because you know what you're talking about. I sometimes feel that women tend to be very insecure. I was very insecure at the negotiation table. I have to admit that as well. And I think it's very important, if you are a woman at the negotiating table, just speak up, be there, speak up for other women. Just be there and try to get the best results of it. We're just as capable or more capable than men. That's what I wanted to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Tanja. Yes, we can all unmute and participate in a clap. And remember to mute. We will take questions at the end after the speakers. So we have a few more amazing people to hear from. Right now, we are actually going to hear some audio from Ground Zero in southern Cameroons. We're going to hear from combatants who are fighting for freedom and liberation.
Good morning, my people. Now me, General Sharon, inside the Red Dragon, under the Red Dragon. I greet you this morning. And I don't be for the war for 3 years. Wait till they push me for say make I join this war and I say I don't like the way the people they treat we Ambazonia. Especially when they be rob you big girls them for mud, beat them. That thing provoke me. For that one for dialogue, I not deal with Yaoundé people. I deal with international bodies. Maybe not only man picking fi fight war. Woman fi fight war. Make una stand strong. God bless una. Thank you.
Now me, General Spy, inside Red Dragon, under Fimasha the King. I want talk say, so I want be for this struggle for 3 years. They still don't make me be for this struggle now because I see the way La Republic is cheat Ambazonia and not be happy. Now it make me I can't join this struggle. And I want to tell government say, let me now LA man picking fi fight war. That team make me I woke up, I pick my own gun, I come for bush can fight war. And for the dialogue where they did what they want make a I believe now for international dialogue, maybe La Republic dialogue. Because their dialogue what they do, now CPTM, and we know I not believe for them. Now me, General Spy for Red Dragon, at Giri News. Thank you. Stay blessed.
Dr. Caroline, I'm calling on my patients to interpret for our guests who do not understand Pidgin English. If she's on, if not, then
yes,
yeah, go ahead.
Yes, I'm here. So those were two generals based on the ground as we speak, and they are basically saying the same thing, that they joined this revolution to fight as women amongst men because of what is happening in our land, because of the way we are treated by the regime, the Biya regime. He calls it the Francophone regime, and also the ruling party CPDM that supposedly is carrying some sort of dialogue to solve the problem. It's not the type of dialogue that we believe will work for this situation, and that they both believe in an international mediated process, and which is what we here as women in the diaspora also support. So basically they're saying that women also can join the fight, and the fight is not limited only to men. And that complements our previous guest from Colombia, Ms. Tanya, something similar to what you've done. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Abedo. And our next very notable speaker is Salma Solomon. She is a native of Sudan, a woman, peace and security expert, and she has over 15 years of experience on DDR, SSR, stabilization, and post-conflict reconstruction, development, and governance issues. Salma worked in post and conflict affected settings across a dozen different countries. And in her work and her processes, she demonstrates creativity in developing innovative, effective, and appropriate approaches to address issues in very complex and highly politicized environments. She holds an MSc in Gender and Governance from Ahmad University, and she's fluent in spoken and written English and Arabic languages. Salma is passionate about advancing gender equality and women's empowerment, and she always ensures that her work is responsive to the needs and interests of the women and girls she is serving. So welcome, Salma. It is so wonderful that you are here with us today. Talk to us about the essential role of women in the peacekeeping process and the peacemaking process. You have seen it all. So tell us, what strategies would you recommend for achieving inclusive and gender responsive negotiations in the peace process? Salma, if you can unmute. We can
Good
hear.
evening to everyone. Good evening to everyone, and good afternoon to some of you. I know there's a and honored to be here today among the most amazing women who dedicated their life and time for bringing peace for Southern Cameroonian people. And I stand in solidarity with your effort, and it bring me honor to extend a hand of support to you. On my presentation, I will, as Carolina stated, I will talk the role that women can play on peace processes, and as well, what are the challenges that we usually face as women on peace processes, as well, what are the strategies and how we can mitigate that. One of the essential problems that women are primarily seen as victims of conflict rather than agents of change and stakeholders. So you will find their participation in peace processes often it's limited, inadequate, and invisible, as the last speaker, Tanja, stated that she was the only woman among her delegation. And so the interests of women are overlooked. So it's been 20 years now since the UN Security Council Resolution 1325 has been passed, and we're still here talking about the importance of women to be represented in the peace processes. So as being said that we constitute more than 50% of the society. We are integral part of its structures. We are stakeholders, agent of change. And moreover, that research has shown that peace processes that involve and engage women, there are likely by 35% for the peace agreement to last for over 15 years. So it's not only issues of right, but it's also issues of efficacy or efficiency that we have to be on the table to make it work. So it is understood and mostly accepted, though not largely practiced, that country can fully realize its development and prosperity prosperity goals if women are included, and also understood that the country can only achieve sustainable peace if women are included. So why today and still we are struggling and trying to push for better inclusion of women. We as women, we need to collectively work and advocate, strategize and work together to advance that goal of inclusive peace processes. Because post-conflict offer a rare opportunity of rewriting the power structure, readdressing the inequality in the society, and thus offer a rare opportunity for addressing gender inequality, having greater opportunity for women bargaining power to be increased and overreaching in the society for lasting change. This is obvious why it is important for us to be there. And I don't want to repeat what my colleague said before, but there's different roles that we can play as negotiators, as facilitators, as advocates, and however, on that level, we are faced with issues of exclusion from policy dialogue on the peace and security processes, which has fundamental gender dimension and implication for sustainable stability. Issues of cultural pressure, where women, I am from a very conservative communities where women movement is largely restricted, especially travel outside. So to engage in and also to engage in the public arena. So we need also to work on that issues of capacity development and training, this for those who are able to participate, so that they be not only they are present as women and being on the table, but also have enough training and tools that make their participation effective. So another challenge also for those who participate in the peace processes, developing women individual and collective capacity to address conflict and to build peaceful society is rarely prioritized, especially when it comes competing with other issues. Lack of access to productive assets such as land, capital, training, and education also limit women bargaining power, as well as their ability to push and exert pressure for greater participation. And also a lack of mechanism to monitor, evaluate the implementation gender agenda in post-conflict settings. So all these are challenged, whether face us at the in terms of the participation on the peace processes, or during our participation in the peace processes, or after during the implementation phase. So we have to understand those challenges and to see how best we can mitigate and address them in order to have better luck in terms of increasing women sitting in the table. This is not only, dark side, but it's also there is lots of opportunity. The international commitments and the normative frameworks for women participation in peace and security, such as 1325, Beijing Platform for Action, CEDAW. These are few to mention. Women can leverage on these standards and normative framework to advocate for women's rights and peace. And also, and most importantly, the donor support to women participation, which can provide conditioned incentives for whether the rebel groups or the governments. And here I'll bring one of the vivid examples from Sudan, the issues of women associated with armed forces during the Sudan DDR program, that the government has denied that they are women associated with armed forces among their ex-combatants or the program because they come from a very conservative background, and this is to them and the definition of women associated with armed forces that put them on shame to take that. However, when the donors has said, okay, we pledge $1 million a program to support women associated with armed forces, and at that time, SPLM, which the signing as part of the agreement from the South Sudan, they brought forward their list for women who were associated with armed forces, but the government now seeing, oh, there is financial benefit of acknowledging the role of women during the conflict and supporting the struggle, which was obvious that women at both sides has played a very critical role in terms of mobilization, fund and resource mobilization, issues of advocacy and propaganda, and some of them, they were combating on the jungle. So now the government come forward and said, okay, we accept that. So you can see the donor commitment and also providing conditioned incentives in terms of, if you do this, have greater participation of women, I am able to support you. Unless you do that, I'm going to scale back on one of two the issues I add to that. So, and also, as I said earlier, in post-conflict and transition, the political game is rewritten. So that provides an opportunity for women to contest the gender and power hierarchies. As the last speaker, Tanya, said, people went to fight because they wanted to address these inequalities, and so increase women participation in decision making. I'll also get an example from my country that the CPA, or the Comprehensive Peace Agreement in Sudan, women gained 35% as women representation, parliamentarian representation, and on other political structure, and also institutional and policy reform in many of the political structures, such as the political party laws, the election laws, so which allowed that quota to be included as one of the, and you can see clearly how much gain that to be for women. And from there, it's only people pushed for more. And also changing the repressive and discriminatory laws that oppressed women and pushed them back from the public arena, and also discriminated against them. You can also recall other examples from, for example, Burundi. Their quota was 30%, and remarkably Rwanda by 50% today. So these are opportunity we should put our eye on when we are working toward peace, so that we see what type of peace we want to create. Yes, silencing the gun is number one priority. Stopping the killing is number one priority, and saving life, but also redressing the injustices and the inequality in the society should be in the heart of our work, because that's what led people eventually to go and fight. So we should not let that go to waste.
So addressing the root problems.
Yes.
Can we unmute and give her a round of applause, please? Were you finished?
If you give me just a few minutes, I wanted to talk about few strategies that I feel are very important. I want to take long. Is there any?
Please. Oh, yes. Yes, please.
Okay. Thank you. I believe that there are a lesson learned from the strategies that we took as women to make this happen. So I will go very quickly for the sake of time. So beyond the formal process, women should organize grassroots consultation, build local structure to allow the voice of women who experience war and every day of their life to be heard, and also allow to transform the local power structure and hierarchy, empower women, and increase their bargaining power in the society. So when we are going to the peace negotiation, we already had those consultations, and we have the results and the voices of women, because we cannot bring everyone to the table, but at least we bring their voices with us. On the national level, also, women from different political factions should form alliances, agreed on unified minimum agenda, sign accord, and form strong structure, and work together to increase political participation and greater gender equality. Recently, just a few weeks ago, Sudan government and the warring faction from Darfur has signed a peace agreement, but that is important. But to me, the most important, the women from the Sudanese Women Union, which is considered a government type of structure, as well the women from the signing parties, they signed an accord that they should work together for greater equality, which wasn't part of the formal peace agreement. That is very important type of mode of working together in order to put women interest in the heart. So decentralization can be a way of more effectively advance peace and create opportunity for women at grassroots level, mobilizing resources, training, accountability arrangement, etc. Another thing that we need a vibrant women movement. This is critical to get women interest in the table, sustain pressure on the government to implement formal commitment. So after you leave the table and you go for the implementation of the peace agreement and everything that you agreed upon, you need those women movements or structure that to put pressure and ensure these things are implemented. Let's say we agreed on quota, we make sure that quota is represented, not only on for national level, but to push at every level. We try to prioritize and support training and facilitate access of this group, because in Sudan we've been through so many peace agreements, starting from the CPA to tens of peace agreements. And one of the issues that always we faced with is issues of resources. So you find women groups want to join the peace agreement and there's no resource. How you support them to travel, have accommodation, and be able to be there on the table, where those resources sometimes are not budgeted for the formal peace planning. So sometimes donors extend their hand and provide that support. And one of the very successful networks that are working, we have a women peace and security group that has been working together and found a sort of like training, financial support, and structure that let them work even beyond women to hold an engender the constitution and bring gender perspective. So another thing also to engage in decision-making processes and to form allies with decision makers and to influence elite bargain in new institutional arrangements. Also establish mechanisms to enforce, monitor the international instruments implementation for protection of women rights in post-conflict situation. And the last thing I would talk about, having a gender expert team. I will put the emphasis on the word team, because you don't want to have a limited number of gender experts and there are different discussion rooms where they are discussing different issues: security sector reform, DDR, peace building, financing and funding, etc. And you have one or gender expert that will not manage to cover all these areas. And also it's important to bring gender expert from the affected community or the society, have a greater understanding and better a contextual and provide better contextual analysis to the situation. Because if you bring someone who doesn't know the country, who doesn't have the perspective and understanding of the real experience of women and on the ground, they will not be able to reflect that. So it is important that to provide that type of support and funding to have a gender expert team. So these are the issues I wanted to talk about, and I hope that you find some of the issues or the strategies you can implement into your current peace processes. At the end, I thank all of the organizers and especially Dr. Emma Ozong for giving this opportunity to allow me be part of this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Selma. Thank you so much. And now my co-moderator, Dr. Osong, will introduce our last exceptional speaker today.
I know, last and certainly not the least, we had Professor Pauline Riak from South Sudan. So again, we have both the North, we just had the head from Selma, who were enemies, and the South. So there is a light at the end of the tunnel for us, Southern Cameroonian Ambazonians. So Professor Riak is a graduate of Stanford University in the United States, the first and only two female full professors at the university level in South Sudan. She brings strong leadership and management expertise to every endeavor she's in. She's the founder of Sudanese Women's Association, SWAN, in Nairobi. Professor Riak has mentored growth and empowerment for over 800 women in exile. In the first government after independence of South Sudan, more than 75% of the prominent political and military women leaders in independent South Sudan were active members of the SWAN organization she founded. She's also co-founder of South Sudanese Women's Coalition for Peace and Development. Professor Riak's biography is very extensive. I will stop there and hope that she's a co-host and can unmute herself. And my question to her to lead off this discussion part is, she speaks of the demystifying the notion that women are weak. What does she mean? And can she suggest strategies on how to achieve a more inclusive and gender responsive processes? And if some of these questions are duplicative, Professor Riak can talk to us about her experiences from a South Sudanese perspective and the freedom and liberation experience and what best practices we can learn. So let's give her a warm welcome, if we can, mute or not. So Professor Riak, if you can mute and let us know, thank you very much.
Snap. Emma, unmute yourself.
If our technical team can let us know if she's experiencing some technical problems, and check in the chat if she is sending out an SOS. I'd like to let the audience know that most of our participants are dialing in from all these different parts of the country, and sometimes connection problems are being experienced. So here's what I found on the web. We would give 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 seconds to see if she's coming on.
Sorry, yeah.
If we don't see her, I would, as I speak, and if she cuts in, I will stop. In my correspondence with Professor Riak, as we planned this activity, I found out that the biggest challenge we had communicating with her from Africa was connection issues. So I will not be surprised if she continued to experience network issues and is unable to join us. So I am pausing just to see if she's coming on board. And if she is not, at this time, I will turn it over to Dr. Hellman to make some brief concluding remarks for us, and then I'll take it over and introduce our next segment, or rather to open it up for Q&A. Dr. Hellman.
Thank you, Dr. Osong. So the theme of today is the role of women in the peace process, but specifically with regard to Southern Cameroon. And I want to just start, my comments will be brief, but I want to provide some data from the United Nations on how few women are actually involved in the peace process. We know that globally, 3% of mediators are women, 4% of signatories are women, and only 13% of negotiators are women. Women make up 51% of the population. We hold up half the sky, and yet we are barely at the table when it comes to negotiating peace. And it matters that we are at the table because a number of studies have found that peace negotiations actually improve the outcome both before, during, and after a conflict. And I am inspired by the words today and the fact that that Dr. Osong and Dr. Abedo and others are addressing this issue now rather than it being a 20-year conflict, a 30-year conflict, and are very cautious and very planful about the fact that it needs to be addressed now. So what might addressing it now mean? Well, we know from previous studies that the participation of civil groups such as this group in the peacemaking process actually reduces the likelihood of failure by 64%. So peace negotiations are much more successful when civic groups, especially those representing women, are involved. And we also know that over a 15-year period, that women's participation is more likely to hold a peace process in place for 15 years or more if they are involved. And it improves the possibility of that by about 35%. So we know a couple of things that have been echoed throughout the comments here today. One is that it really matters that women are in the peace process. Two, that very few women are in the peace process. And I don't want to offer recommendations. Rather, I would like to just briefly offer my summary of what I heard from the experts and the women on the ground and the women who have been living this for decades. This is what I heard today about what is so important right now in the conflict that is going on in Cameroon. Leo really stressed the importance of getting a ceasefire and getting all the parties back to the table. That was my big takeaway from what she said. Shadia about how the peace agreement is just the start. And this is something that we heard from speaker after speaker. The implementation is actually key. So if we put those two things together, the most pressing concern is the ceasefire and getting the parties back to the table and getting that piece of paper in order to start the actual long haul work, which is the implementation. And then Beth talked to us about being aware of selective prosecution, both in terms of a disproportionate focus on prosecuting conflicts in African countries, but also the selective prosecution of one side over another. And so being very cautious and planful about making sure that that does not happen as the peace process moves forward in this particular region, this conflict. And then Tanja talked about the fact that that we should always be suspicious when there's only one woman at the table, that she's probably been tokenized, that she is there because she is a woman, and to demand that we be 50% of the table, because that's what women are across the globe, right? That's what women are in each societies where there are conflicts. We should demand that we are 50% at the table. And also that we need women to be an integral part of the peace process because, again, implementation is key. So we heard the same concern that Shadia brought up. Tanja also echoed that concern, that a peace agreement is just a piece of paper. It is the map, it is the roadmap for a very long process for actually gaining peace, long-term, lasting, permanent peace, as the name of this organization stresses so well. And then Salma commented on the fact that women must be involved in the peace process for it to be lasting, for a reason that was brought up in a lot of the other speakers' comments, but she just hit the nail on the head, that if you want lasting peace, you actually need lasting and substantive gender equality, social gender equality, political gender equality, and economic gender equality. Because at the end of the day, lasting peace and permanent peace can only happen if you actually address the root causes that inspired the conflict in the first place. So I see that the comments from this group have provided us the roadmap, right? The importance of getting a ceasefire, getting the parties to the table, getting the peace agreement, making sure that it is implemented. How do you make sure that it is implemented? You make sure that women are 50% of the process, and you make sure that gender equality, both social, political, and then economic, are all a part of the long-term planning process. And then, as Beth cautioned us, be concerned about the involvement of the ICC and others in terms of disproportionate prosecution, and making sure that that part of the process is fair as well. I am just so honored to be a part of this process. And again, want to thank Dr. Osong in particular.
We're going to do some questions before you do your final thanks. We're going to try and take some questions. I wanted to interject there, so go ahead.
So let's take some questions. So if you can go to the chat or you can put up your hand. I know that there have been a couple of hands that have gone up throughout this process, so audience members are really anxious to ask panelists some questions. If you can direct it to particular panelists, that would be great. So in the chat, or anyone want to raise their hand to ask a question of Leo? I think actually she may be gone. Shadia, Beth, Tanja, and Salma.
This is Patience. Thanks so much, Dr. Herman. I don't know, I had some difficulties putting my hand there for some reason. So I will start the questioning session. I want to ask of all of our panelists or discussants, this one question, which I think may be a burning question for everyone listening. What suggestion do they give to us? What advice do they give to us to get La Republic to the table sooner? We are Ambazonians. We are women of Ambazonia seeking a peaceful, permanent peace. But we cannot get there without getting to that table to discuss the root causes. So my question is, how do we get them to that table, and as soon as possible? Thank you.
Would any of our panelists like to address that? Just unmute and hop on in.
I think you brought a very difficult question, and honestly, I've been hammering my mind since I spoke to Emma the first time. How can we make the war infraction stop and come to the table? I've seen experiences of women trying to exert pressure using their power, the social given power, to push women to go to the table. For example, I will bring very funny but very interesting experience for women in Liberia when they had a sex strike. They said, we are not going to have any type of intimacy with our men unless you stop this nonsense and come and sit on the table. Another example where women locked the negotiator inside the room and said, no one is leaving this room unless you agree on peace. So, they used the cultural belief that seeing a naked woman body, it's especially if an elderly, could be a curse, where women said, I threaten, I will remove my clothes if I see you continue fighting. So demonstration, I won't say you should do those examples literally, but I'm sure you know what you as women on that context, what power do you have? How do you advocate collectively and exert pressure on both sides, whether the government, whether the warring faction, to say, we need this to stop right now. We need you to sit on the table and talk. I'll be very also interested to hear from other panelists what they can offer in terms of perspective.
Anja.
I want to say something about our peace process. How do women get to the table? In our process, it was very important, as I already expressed, the pressure from women organizations from Colombia. But as in Colombia, there's a lot of patriarchy. It's very strong in Colombia. So really, nor the FARC, nor the government, I think, paid a lot of attention to it, you know? And I think in our case, it was important, the pressure was important, because already they also pressed through the media, you know, and the media do have like some meaning for men, but it was also very important to have our mediator countries, which in our case were Cuba and Norway. And those are both countries which pay a lot of attention to gender inclusion. And they were like the guarantor countries at our peace process, Cuba and Norway. So they did an excellent job in terms of creating the gender subcommission. They went to speak to the man from the FARC, they went to speak to the man from the government, and they really helped us a lot. We always had our meetings with some people from Cuba and from Norway present. They would help us with the logistics for our meetings with women from all over the world. They were really a big help, the mediators.
Thank you. Any other questions? You can put your hand up or unmute and ask your question. Ma Alice, if you could unmute and ask your question. Ma Alice.
Yeah, hello everyone. This discussion that we have here has been very, very rewarding. My question concerns the implementation of resolutions. What advice do we have? We understand at this point that even bringing the parties to the table has been a very, very difficult task. And I think it is with most countries or most people that have revolutions like we have. And even if we are trying to bring people to the table for negotiations, are there any, from those that have experience, any advice that we can learn from on how to make sure that we implement those resolutions when we have them? Because we might be fighting, and at the end we have resolutions that we cannot implement. So the status quo is going to remain the same. So what can we do?
Is this for any particular panelist, or are you opening it up for?
Well, I wanted to address it to Tanja, but I think she already said that implementation has been difficult in Colombia. Maybe any other person, any other panelist that can offer us some ideas on how we can resolve that issue would be appreciated.
I actually may say something about that, which I haven't mentioned before, which the thing I did mention before was that a peace agreement shouldn't be too complicated. I felt that the peace agreement in Colombia is very complete. It's perfect. For me, it was perfect. I was so happy when we signed it, but it was too complicated. You know, there are too many commissions, there are too many measures, there are too many things, and the government isn't able to implement all these things. But something else which I haven't mentioned before, and I don't know, maybe it's a little, how do you say that, polemical, is the fact that we had weapons, you know, as an insurgent force. We had our weapons, and we made a peace agreement on the decommissioning of weapons. And the peace agreement included a decommissioning within 6 months, and the government didn't have to do anything to accomplish from the peace agreement. I don't know if you can understand me. It was just a 6 months process, and I think when I'm looking back upon it right now, I think the process, the decommissioning of weapons should have been different. There should always be some pressure on the government to accomplish, on the other side, on the other part of the conflict, to accomplish the peace agreement, you know? We handed in our weapons, I think that was in 2017, and nothing had been accomplished of the peace agreement. But there were no weapons anymore, so there's no pressure on the government to accomplish anything. The government just wanted to have the weapons from the guerrilla, and that was it. For us, it's enough. We don't need to change the power structures in the country. We don't need the countryside to develop. We don't care about the peasants. We don't care about political participation for whom. We're already in power, you know? So I think that's a lesson we have learned. We should have had some way of saying, you know, like, we're going to hand over 20% of our weapons, but instead you should accomplish the first point of the agenda, for example. Then we're going to hand in another 30% of the weapons, but then you should accomplish a law that makes that all people can politically participate in Congress, you know? Something like that.
Interesting. Thank you for that question, Tanya. Thank you very much. I see a question in the chat box that says, how can the women at UN help in our case? And what should we do for them to carry our case forward? I think this, again, is not particularly to any one person, so perhaps somebody can volunteer whether women at the UN can champion a case like that of Women for Peace and Justice, as this participant is asking.
If I can come in?
Yes, please.
I think UN Women, which work very hard in terms of advancing 1325 and ensuring that women are participated fully on the table. They provide financial, logistical support, as well as training. So these are the resources that you have to leverage in from the UN. Will be very helpful if you could reach the UN women at the country and to see what type of support, because at this stage, I believe you already took the step in terms of forming this structure, Women for Permanent Peace. So you need to bring support in terms of training and capacity building, support of women who are going to be part of the peace negotiation or the peace processes, on the formal process as well as the informal part, where the women groups and civil society organization would like to participate and hold a what they call complementary events there in terms of advocacy, in terms of training, etc., as well as to help to do some consultation back home and to rally grassroots women to come together, discuss, and bring their voices forward. So, yeah.
So a question about rallying grassroots that we need to raise and whether there are any best practices out there. There is a lot of concern around safety and security. It's obvious that some are wondering, why do we have all these women from Sudan, Indonesia, Colombia, South Sudan, The Hague, United States, and we don't have a Southern Cameroonian, Ambazonian woman here speaking? There are issues of safety and security. So my question really, perhaps Tanya is more close to this, and Beth, when do the blue helmets come in? And this question as you're considering the answer, how do we create those safe spaces that the real victims can engage? And then I'll have Caroline read the next question in the chat. So if you could offer us some clarity how the space can be included to that which has the real direct victims. Meanwhile, right now, there are no opportunities for freedoms of speech and assembly. So I'd like to know if there are any ways we can move forward with this dynamic of real war in our homeland and still be advocating successfully and building those capacities and grassroots involvement. Anyone?
Oh, Emma?
Yes.
Dr. Yeah.
Yes.
I probably can't answer the question entirely, but it seems to me, I think that kind of the precursor to getting to the question is being sure that you as an organization, as Women for Permanent Peace and Justice, have some kind of status among the entities with which you want to interact. I wanted to mention this last time. I mean, if you, for example, if you have some kind of status with the Department of Public Information at the UN, it gives you more of a right in some ways, or with ECOSOC, to call on UN women to do X, Y, or Z, or to make demands to various entities there. Similarly, the observer status to the African Union, because that puts you organizationally in a position to say, can these groups, the AU or the UN, help us on the ground in some way? In terms of the blue helmets, you know, I don't have a position on that, except mostly a caution, which is I would be careful to be clear, very clear about what you want to create in terms of a safe space, how you want to enforce that, to work that out and think that through. People may have done that, but to lay that out very specifically, because you want to be sure that if you invite in the blue helmets, for example, that they're doing what you want them to do, what the people on the ground want and need. So they don't come without issues, and it's not a personal thing of a blue helmet, who the person is. They don't come without issues of who controls, who decides, who oversees. And, you know, that's enough on the blue helmets, but I think they don't come without considering these things and the problems that get attached. And I think that, you know, I think that if you're in a position, I mean, for example, you're talking about a safe space on the ground for people to live, go to school, to have a normal life, right? A safety zone. I don't know what those zones are called in war situations, all right? no conflict zones or a DMZ. I'm thinking about North and South Korea. I don't know I don't know exactly what to call those zones, but it seems to me that arguing for that, once you have that idea, flushing it out and arguing for that among the appropriate entities would be a start and would give some relief, maybe not tomorrow, but hopefully sooner than later, to people on the ground. And the third thing I just wanted to say while talking is that I think that, while the dynamic of what's going on is driven by what's on the ground, I think the role of international pressure, whether through UN agencies or other groups, international public opinion, however one defines that, is important. You look at what happened in South Africa. The ANC and other liberation movements won through armed struggle in South Africa at the end of the day. They ended up there was negotiations, okay. But the point was international pressure and the various movements throughout the world against apartheid, for divestiture, et cetera, played an important role. And I think that, unfortunately, I think that a lot of the people outside of Cameroon need to be educated and as to what is happening and why this is important. And secondly, I think that in terms of the issues of the crimes being committed against people on the ground, I mean, you can organizationally raise who is accountable, who in the government is accountable for this, where can we go? There's a way you can deal with this strategically. And I think it's important because the government has to be in a position where they don't just have to deal with the crisis internally, right? But you want to create in some ways a crisis externally in terms of international public opinion. And there are all pieces of this that are being done through UN agencies, the Human Rights Committee, et cetera, and they have to be pulled together. That's a big job. But an entity such as yourselves have a critical role to play because of your constituency who are victims and survivors. We talk about victims, and I understand that, and we use that word all the time. But at some point, I think in some of the discussions, we have to start talking about survivors, because the women and the children are victims, and some have been killed, but they are survivors, and their families of the deceased are survivors. So that's what we're talking about, how to survive in a war situation.
Thank you so much. Dr. Caroline, let's look at coming to a hard stop on this session at about 4 at the top of the hour. So you want to take the next, I think there was a question in the chat or so.
I think there are 9.
I can't raise my hand, but I would like to ask a question, please.
So there are 9 questions. There are 5 hands, so we'll just take them in the order they came in. So Dennis asked a question, great initiative and wonderful presenters. My concern is this: will the resolution of this conference be sent to the government of Cameroon? How does this initiative engage the government of Cameroon to come to the negotiation table? So whoever would like to address that. Anyone? Maybe that's a question for Dr. Osong.
I'm not a presenter. I was looking at Beth here and trying, to figure out how did they get to getting both parties to Cuba? What was it that made you leave and go there? Right now, there is the table by Switzerland that has offered its good offices to mediate, but there's just one party there and some outside parties that are not part of it, but the government of Cameroon is not at that table. Are there any best practices beyond what we've heard pressure to get the government, who is clearly a party, who is waging war on us, to use this avenue to resolve the crisis once and for all? It's really our concern right now.
Yes, Emma, I think I think that it's important to convince the government that they're not going to win the war. And that prolonging a war when you already know that nobody's going to win it, it simply becomes a crime, you know, because it causes a lot of victims, you know, and it's in some way it's important to show that to them, that they're not going to win the war, that nobody is going to be the winner in this war, you know. And also I think it's important what we did in our process was the world got to know about our process in 2012, but we started negotiating behind cameras more or less 1.5 years before. Those were called like the exploratory meetings, and that was when the agenda was set up and everything. So it's always good to have those kind of contacts which aren't public and which wouldn't like make the government lose its public prestige if it doesn't work out, or if they finally don't want to have the peace negotiations. It's all about like, how do you say that in English? Trust building, building trust. Confidence building between the two parties. And I think there should always be people in between who are very quiet, you know, who don't seek any public attention, and who are able to mediate between the two parties and to say, hey, what's going on? I mean, what is the final goal for you? Like, you're not going to win the war, so you should sit down on the table, and that's not going to represent any loss for you, you know. It's going to be a win-win situation. That's important to explain, but I don't know. I think it's very difficult. It would be easier to ask it to somebody from the government, you know. Yeah, because they're not always convinced of it. They just think we're the government and we need to impose ourselves by force.
Thank you, Chanja. And Anderson Kajong, you've had your hand up for the longest. Anderson?
Yeah.
Unmute.
Oh. Okay, thank you guys very much. My name is Dr. Anderson Kajang. I think we are discussing, what we are discussing here, we are talking about two parties. One is a French speaking and one is English speaking. The French speaking got their own independence separate from the English, and they wanted to form a union, and the union did not work because there was not even a treaty of union. They were all Class B of the UN trust territory. And the French people, they have weapons, they have, I mean, soldiers, and then the other people just, I mean, Ambazonia or Southern Cameroons just have self-defense, what we call Ambazonia Restoration Forces, that are defending the population and also defending themselves against annexation. So how can women or the United Nations bring these two parties to the table? And how can they convince one party to drop her own weapons? I don't, whether one party can drop weapons, let's say the Ambazonia Restoration Forces, to actually put down their weapons, and the French Cameroon to hold their own weapons. How can that be possible?
Sounds like a Tanya question to me.
It does.
You're on the hot seat. I knew you were up to the challenge. Okay. How were you convinced?
I think, how can we convince people of dropping their weapons? I think I've already spoken about that. You know, it's not about dropping weapons. It's about a confidence building process. We had 6 unilateral ceasefires, the guerrilla forces, before coming to a bilateral ceasefire. And there were a lot of confidence building measures in Colombia. and not only unilateral ceasefires, but also, for example, we had some captured people which we released, especially from the guerrilla sides. There were a lot of measures of goodwill to show goodwill, you know, but also from the government. I can't remember anything right now, but there were also some goodwill measures from the government, you know, and that's the way you, little by little, you go and build confidence between the two parties, and it eventually ends up in dropping weapons. But it's not about like, hey, come on, you get to the table and just, how are you going to drop your weapons, you know? And I think it has also become clear in this whole seminario that it's not about dropping weapons. It's about people take up weapons because of something, you know, that's not for free. Mm-hmm. In Colombia, people took up weapons because they weren't allowed to participate in politics. They weren't allowed to get to their objectives or to their goals through any other means. So those are the issues you have to address. It's not just about dropping weapons. And I think if you address those issues, if you speak to both parties, if you're able to express what is going to happen, if you're not sitting at the table, that's also a good strategy, you know? And I would like to add this, it's like kind of an anecdote. In Havana, we had 6 meetings with victims. That was in 2014, 2015, more or less. With 12 or 15 victims went to each meeting, and they had 15 minutes to tell their stories and to make their proposals to the negotiation table. And I am sure that both for the government as for the guerrilla forces, that was a very impacting experience, yeah, to see, and also for myself. Like, I always saw the struggle as a class struggle, and I wasn't able like to understand the pain of victims if they were a higher class victims, you know? That was something I was kind of blind for. I only thought about victims, peasant victims, and poor victims, you know? And at that moment, when I started to listen also to the victims of the guerrilla forces, I got to understand that victims are victims and that they feel the same pain, you know? And I think for the government forces and for the guerrilla forces, that was a very, very important moment. Those 5 or 6 meetings we had, like, to understand why we should make peace. Sometimes we would listen to the stories of the victims, and I would look to the other side where the people of the government were sitting, and everybody was crying, and all the guerrilla fighters were crying as well, the 10 representatives. I think that had a big impact on us. And I think that's a very good way of convincing people to drop weapons and to say no more war.
Thank you. We have time for one more question. I'm sorry, we have so many, and I'm thinking that maybe we'll save the chat and have specific speakers get back to you if they can. But the last question goes to Mayor Kari, who's had their hand up for a long time. Mayor.
Mayor Kari, unmute yourself. Kari. It's not there, move on to the next.
Okay, one last question then.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Thank you.
All right, sorry about that. It was the system was telling me only the host can unmute me. It's all right. Thank you. We got it. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you for all the hard work. Thank you, the organizers. This is remarkable. You know, I can go on and on the praises, but for the sake of time, I want to keep it very brief. How do you manage time, you know, in this process? Time, how do you manage time? We understand that, you know, people are dying, destruction is taking place. We want that to halt. At the same time, we don't want to rush the process because we want to make sure that, you know, you get everything right so that we can have a lasting, that we can achieve justice and lasting peace. We also want to make sure that it doesn't go on forever. You know, so how do you manage time in this situation? Thank you very much. Any one of you panelists can take this.
Speak up, Tanya. How did you survive 10 years? Sylvia, how did you survive? How do we get to the end, and how do we safeguard the peace process but yet save lives? In other words, how do we get from boardroom to ground zero and make it impactful so that the death and destruction stops?
Well, I feel a little bit embarrassed of being speaking all the time, but I think the answer is a bilateral ceasefire. You know, the guerrilla forces in Colombia, we asked for a bilateral ceasefire since the beginning of the peace agreements, and the government never would do that, would agree to it. However, the guerrilla forces, as I've already said, we did 6 unilateral ceasefires before we came to a bilateral ceasefire, which is a very difficult situation, you know, because you have like a guerrilla force with weapons in the jungle who are told to not attack the enemy, but the government was attacking us, actually. They were like surrounding us, they were making movements. And then the guerrilla forces on the ground would get very frustrated, they would get angry. And it was very important for us to have like much control over troops and to be able to tell them, no, this is necessary. We should have a unilateral ceasefire because we want to stop war. But if it's possible, I think it's very important to have a bilateral ceasefire, because that means there are no victims anymore, or very few victims, and then you can really take your time and sit down at the table and speak without those military situations in your country influencing on the peace negotiations, you know, because we had a rule in our peace negotiations, and the rule was invented by the government, and they said no military situation in Colombia should affect the discussions at the table. But we found out that that was very difficult, you know. Things would happen in Colombia, they would bomb a camp of ours. Once they bombed a camp and there were like 32 guerrilla fighters who died, and then it's very, very difficult to get back to the table and not to start screaming and crying and everything. And for the government as well. We once had a military action, 11 soldiers from the government died, and then it's very difficult for them not to say, we're going to cut down, we're going to stop the peace negotiations, this doesn't go anywhere. So I think the best way to start a peace negotiation is with a bilateral ceasefire. Then you can take your time, really.
Well, we are out of time. Thank you for that response and for this extraordinary panel. I want to thank Rita Lupidia, Shadia Mahaban, Beth Lyons, Tanja Najim-Majir, Salma Soliman, and especially the organizers, Dr. Abedo and Dr. Osong, for making this happen. This is the start of something extraordinary, or reflects the long work, but we have a long road in front of us. And I have a lot of faith that with this group of women at the table, that we can bring permanent peace to the region. Dr. Osong.
Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you, Dr. Caroline, for doing such a marvelous job. You make my job this afternoon so much easier. Thank you, panelists, for particularly Shadia, who is joining us, and it's exactly 4 a.m. her time. As you can see on your screen, we couldn't answer your questions because there's a program coming right behind us. So please stay for it. We have some phenomenal surprises for you coming up in the next segment. But before, and I'm inviting our guests to stay if they can. I understand the time constraints from the parts of the world you're calling in from. So please don't think we are not mindful for that. And if you cannot, we understand.
Dr. Osong, I think you have someone who is in the house to thank your panelists before they leave.
Yes,
I
want to say that I'm handing it over to you.
No, you have a surprise guest who wants to thank your panelists before they leave.
Thank you. Yes, let me yield at this point, Ma Irene. Let me yield. Thank you.
Ma Irene, before you continue, I just want to make a comment before I invite this surprise guest. Just after the surprise guest comes on, we have a raffle for the first 100 people that attended. So Rachel is going to do a drawing, and we'll have announced a name of somebody who was here within the first hour of this webinar today, so that they can get a gift. Now, it's my pleasure to invite one person to say hello to our guest. I'm not going to announce his name. I just want him to come up and surprise the guests so that they know that he appreciates everything that they've done for us today. Can we unmute the guest?
Yes, just unmute it. Yes, I want to use this opportunity to thank you, to thank the women of Ambazonia, but especially the women of ACT, Dr. Abiedo, our able Dr. Emma Osong, and our wonderful guests. You will want to know that I've been in the background just listening and learning. And I'm very, very excited to know that all the women across the world are adding their voices to the plight of Ambazonian women especially. Because Ambazonian women are those who are actually bearing the brunt of this conflict. They are burying their husbands, their children. They are surviving in bushes, in refugee camps. They're the ones to take care of the orphans of this conflict and the widows and the neighbors. It is terrible. And the men can win the war, but they cannot win the peace without the women. And I think that what is going on here should be encouraged. I thank you, Dr. Caroline. I followed some of part of your presentation, and Shalma, Riak, you're wonderful, and every one of you. I just hope that you give us this helping hand always, continually, and see how we can expand this platform to bring the peace that we need in our sub-region. Thank you very much.
By the way, I failed to introduce you formally. The person who just spoke is Dr. Samuel Ikobe Sako, and he is the President of the Federal Republic of Ambazonia, the interim government that we have. Thank you so much, President Sako.
Thank you.
Okay, now I'm going to hand over to Ma Rachel to do the drawing for the free gift. Ma Rachel.
Yes, Dr. Patience, I am honored to have this session. Before then, I would like to thank every woman and man that is in the house, most especially our panelists who have made a wonderful day that has made this show a reality. We thank you all for taking out the time to be here with us. Personally, I'm very grateful. I've learned a lot, and I hope, I wish all of us, the Ambazonian women, we are going home with a heavy package to start unfolding and knowing how to put our steps gradually to achieve what you all have already achieved in your own country. We thank you, and we hope that you will be with us next time whenever we knock at your doors. Without taking much of our time, I would like any parent in the house to get a child at home to pick any number between 1 and 100. Any parent at home, just pick a number. This number is the lucky number for those who came in within the first hour of this wonderful event.
Ma Rachel, to save time, maybe you could have your daughter pick up a number.
Martha, there's somebody that's picking a number here.
Oh, there is? Okay.
Yes, Francisca, what number did you say?
90.
90, she said.
90, number
90.
Okay.
I did it already. Number 90, wow. And number 90 is, it's a telephone number.
Uh-oh.
Maybe we
that is
we want to call out the number. Maybe the participant is still on.
Exactly.
Yes, read out the number.
That was 131-32086-198.
Can the person identify him or herself? We'll give them about 3 seconds because we need to move to the next program. Can they identify themselves? If not, the young girl should pick up another number.
Yeah.
We need to unmute them, please. We need to unmute that number.
Well, the number, if they're on, they should hear their number and unmute themselves.
No, they are not able to. They can raise their hands up. They are not able to.
Wait, Fran, wait. You might need to choose a different number, Francisca.
I choose 20.
What number?
Fran, come back here. 25, she said.
25. 25 is Patricia Esparza.
If you're on, can you raise your hand? We will know that you have heard your name. If not, we have to do this quickly and go to the next lucky participant.
So
Ma Emma, I think I'm seeing the hand, Ma Emma. There's a hand.
I am here. Esparza is on.
Oh.
Hey.
Yeah.
You got a book?
Oh, thank you. So you will leave your, if you don't feel comfortable putting in the chat, the number that flashed on the screen, contact the number to receive what is perhaps the most engaging, detailed book written by one of the NARA 10 Ambazonian refugees who were extradited, who were arrested, captured, and returned to Cameroon and are serving a life sentence. In the name of Ngala Fo, who wrote Paradise Lost. Part of the reason why we're here today is that successive generations have come and not know their history. And they were told that they were part of a country. And today we find ourselves, after many decades of assimilation and subjugation and now full-scale war, beginning to look for credible sources of history to understand what the construct Cameroon is. So it is our pleasure, the women of peace and permanent peace and justice, to send this to you and share it if you can, so people understand the root causes for why we find ourselves with 10,000 or more of our own fellow citizens dead and many hundreds refugees. So contact this number for your address so we can send this to you. So congratulations, Patricia.
Thank you. What an honor. Thank you
for
so much.
joining. Yes.
Patricia Esparza.
And so the rest of the gifts and the surprises, you have to stay for the next segment. If you truly believe that there's a humanitarian crisis unfolding, you would stay to support the fundraising that's coming up for the women micro project, Women of War, to support them. Women for Peace and Justice have collaborated with women for the Southern Cameroon Women's Empowerment Program to launch this, and that we hope that all of you would stay. Every little bit counts. And just so that we know that we've come to the end of this, again, Dr. Caroline, you don't know what you've done for us. Thank you so much. To our guest, on behalf of the women who have worked so hard to put this together, we offer you our sincere gratitude. We want friends along the way to this permanent peace. We understand peace is just a destination. The hard work is behind it, but we need partners along this journey to shorten it for all of us. And with that, I want to turn it over to a lady that I've only watched virtually, but I have tremendous respect for. Two of them, one is called Lady Casey, and the other is called, we just simply call her my Irene. Can you take this over? Thank you all from the bottom of our hearts. Please stay for even more exciting things to come. Thank you.
Wow. Ma Emma, thank you so much. But when I get that necklace, I'll even thank you double. But thank you so much to our beautiful panelists. You have given us so much homework, more than what we even have today. You know, there's always joy in my face, but you can see there's no joy today. After listening to our sister in Colombia, Colombia, that is our story. And this story is a really, really sad story. For most of us, we have homes to live in. For most of us, we have beds to sleep. For most of us, we have the sad stories of our sisters giving birth in the forests and dying because there is no medical care. You know, I would love to just have that song, Ma Patience. We are homeless in our own country. I always like that piece because it reminds all of us, when we can go. My patients stopped me from shopping this year because there's so much to do with money. So I just always like that song. It takes us home to where we are. And I cry all the time I listen to it because it's just heartbreaking to me. But I cannot thank you, Ma Patience, Ma Emma. Thank you so much, Ma Bridget, Ma Winnie, for putting it together. I am so grateful. Thank you so much. Do you have that song, Mape?
I think Mr. Nanchop has a different song to play right now.
Right, Mr. Nanchop, where is he? Mr. Nanchop.
They're on the other platform.
In our winter night, the angels begin their flight. Dark skies with miles to go, no footsteps to be lost in snow. They fly.
She is a victim because she now has a son who is crippled because that son was shot in the head. I'll be talking to her and I'll be asking her a couple of questions, and I would expect that that's what you want to hear. And you will listen to her, she will give her version in English, what she has experience, what she's experiencing, and what she thinks other women are experiencing. This is for the interest of women, for feminine peace and justice. Mama, welcome. We did talk about this fight way there outside, about this struggle way there outside, way there outside, where all man they suffer. Man begin then they suffer, woman then they suffer, begin then they suffer. But you be mommy, where you get picking them, and where you get inside the suffer. If you just try to tell your story small for the world, make them know way you, like woman, you don't feel it, and where you feel it. Where if it be the story for plenty woman, because we don't get in touch with plenty woman. Tell me your story.
Okay, Daddy, thank you. I just allow all my way the list where we're listening for this video. 2018, my pikin just woke up, open door, say me come out outside for good peace. Go still there inside house. 1 year we here gone. Nobody cry. Say they shoot pikin when they do it for house. We run come out for check and say nobody cry wait till one come out when I'm on pikin way. Military don't can sleep for planted them for night. If one come out for outside for good peace for morning time, they shoot it for a hit. They shoot it for a hit now. We come on now with all man picking them all. They don't hear gun or they don't run. Now woman them where they be the tie hat. So woman they say they be run. The one the way they be the tie hat, they come. We not them. I be already collapse myself. My picking collapse. The other men then they run. Now some other neighbor they went a woman there. They didn't take wrapper then tie and for cash blood for a hit me for cash that blood for a hit. It passed them. They take and put her inside truck. Push and go down for health center. Health center people they don't run them all. He sleep for day. The only bleed. The one before for evening. Someone then talk say we not fit keep and so me die. They put them again inside truck. Push and bring them for general hospital. Then he sleep for day 2 days safe. They not even see a person we go operate the head. Before they call person will be in charge for head. You can operate the head after 2 days. He move the bullet now. Then from then, he be even if he talk, he be paralyzed. They put 13 bags of blood for his skin. And which now he dey on a diet, he dey on physiotherapy, he dey on life medication, and he pass way for get and right now since the crisis they only continue to go. And plenty women them they don't suffer this thing. Now if you go for villages now woman then they work out. Now the woman then they for villages you will see the one where they don't kill a man, kill even Peking. You see some other one the way they don't burn their houses they live now under trees. You see some other one them now them they go fix bridge where they even pass go farm for go find some small thing. Some other one them you want to see them now them they dig grave for bury poison the way they don't already kill them. So this crisis really affect now we women the most and picking them. So we only pray and say me God take control inside this crisis, because if it continue only so, all boys them will finish. And it don't even make them for it don't traumatize me for way even if you talk something for me now, you ask me again after I will talk something, you know.
I had talk the story, but do the need for here. And no say you know fit whole heart for the talk for the way you don't see it. But tell your story. When someone wants something for you, continue.
You don't even make them develop high blood way. You don't check them for hospital where I didn't get high blood. Where even at the time let's say I get problem. When you even talk something on me now, small time ask me, I'll talk something, you know, tell me something. So the thing just disturb plenty women then. You go inside villages now, you know if you see a man picking for day, you only see a woman there. Even now when I tie hard woman there, the other one then they inside bushes. So this thing, you don't know if Papa God no intervene for them, they will not know. Because we suffer a lot inside this thing.
For that woman, the way they don't tie hard stay, they are picking them, girl picking, boy picking, they deal with them.
The boy picking them, they don't run. The one that they still there alive, so they don't run. They get on themselves. They finish can't take the rape them. They finish can't rape them and rape them. So the bonbon houses them. Even you get we are get picking place or stays them no good day because they don't bonbon houses them and they still continue to burn them. So
now, so now, so you know they're in a village, you're in a town.
Yes, that's it.
And you're there with this begin where you know you day. You get where you feel look at this begin day.
Where no day because I deal with the begin, I deal with the begin, I deal with all the begin them, I deal with the grand begin them to means of living for we had before they talk now for the